The technology, isn't it?
Can be. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Today we have a really important topic that we're going to be sharing with our attendees. As everybody knows, COVID-19 has strongly affected our community in a lot of different ways over the last few months. And one of those that is most strongly affected is just the mental health of everybody on a personal level, both in your homes, for your children who are in schools, for employers who are working with their employees. This topic is really top of mind, and we hear it over and over again as we're talking to the businesses in the Fox cities. So we're very, very thankful today to have some subject matter experts with us. We have Kristen Lowe from Catalpa Health. We have Rayanne Thomas, who is from Ascension EAP, and Catherine Langdon from Theta Care Behavioral Health. So thank you, ladies, for being here. We're so thankful that you took time out of your busy schedules to join us. I'm Tanya Belter. I'm the VP of Member Services with the Fox Cities Chamber, and I'll be behind the scenes just kind of facilitating today. Everything will be recorded, and this will be shared to our social media, to our website for anybody who would like to access it after the fact. And we do encourage attendee participation. So if you have questions that arrive during the presentation, we encourage you to ask those via the Q&A or the chat feature. And we will save all those till the end. Once all the ladies are done with their presentation topics, we'll then go to that Q&A section. But again, this is a great opportunity for you to ask those questions of the experts while we have them at hand. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Rayanne, who's going to kick us off for today. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Tanya.
Sure.
Everybody, I'm going to share my screen so you can see some slides. Here we go. Okay, so mental health, how COVID has affected our mental health. I'll be talking more about the workplace and how mental health has affected the workplace in this COVID environment. But I want to give you a little bit of background before we go too far, because I think it's just important to know that this isn't a new thing. So mental health has been a concern or a challenge for people for centuries. Polite conversation would keep us from talking about this in social settings or even in the workplace in the past. But COVID has really changed the playing field about that. Chronic stress, which is a lot of what we're all under these days, can really exacerbate mental health and substance abuse problems. So I'm sure that Catherine and Kristen will be able to tell a little bit more about that. Our addictions and problems of compulsion are probably more difficult than ever. And it's no longer polite or wise to ignore these issues. So today, from an EAP perspective, we're going to talk about mental health in the workplace. It's just different now. We've had mental health issues in the workplace, depression, anxiety, drug and alcohol issues. EAP was a great resource for all of those problems and more before COVID. But the problem is we had protective factors before that helped employees handle some of those troubles. And those protective factors are a little bit harder to get a handle on or utilize at this point. So for you, what does an employer do when you have employees who are suffering in the workplace? And just a little kind of thing to reflect about, social distancing doesn't mean we're not together. There is a collective together. It's just that it's not a physical together. And we all are in it together these days, especially behavioral health and EAP. We're your two best resources these days. We will help you succeed by working together and working together with you. So there aren't obvious answers to these problems. What works for one company may not work for another company, but we're finding our way together, and we're all in this together. Our current state, and Catherine and Kristen will probably be able to back me up on this, statistically, we used to say that 1 in 5 employees, or 1 in 5 people actually, suffered from some sort of mental health challenge, a diagnosable issue or some transient kind of issue that caused them to have to pay closer attention and do something about their own mental health. Nowadays, it's 5 out of 5. There isn't anybody that gets to skate through this COVID stuff without feeling a little bit of stress, and that stress may add fuel to the fire of other problems. So functioning within this crisis, the pandemic has changed the definition of normal. Before, you could come in feeling a little bit under the weather. People say, oh, I hope you feel better by afternoon, or I hope you feel better tomorrow. Now, if you sneeze at work, people are panicking. Being a teacher is a whole different deal. Being a teacher is like being a first responder or a cop, right? You should get hazard pay for that. And being an employee means juggling so many new issues. We're hearing so often these days how parents are trying to figure out how to do school, homeschool, virtual school, in-person school, the fear of their kid getting a fever and not being able to go to school. So we're managing all that stuff every day. And really, the big answer about this is it's all about adapting. We don't want to find a solution that we think we can apply every day, and it's got to be that way, and that's the only solution. We need to look at things and say, well, today this will work, tomorrow we may need to try something else. So it's obvious that COVID increases anxiety and stress. Another thing that COVID has done is caused people to feel a loss of sense of control. And I think that's tough for us. We think if we're smart enough, we can kind of control our environment and our surroundings and make decisions that will take good care of us, and we'll be okay. But we don't have all that control that we used to think we had. Substance use is terribly on the rise. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. And then grief. I think we don't always realize, and while grief isn't necessarily a pathology, it can become chronic, especially when you're thinking about the daily losses and the losses compounded by more losses. So those are all issues that we're dealing with. And then finally, there's this moral dilemma. As an employer, you'll see employees struggle with questions that weren't even imaginable before. Should I go to work? Should I stay home and stay safe? How does coming home interact with work nowadays? We have teachers or people in service organizations that are exposed to lots of other people, their clients, right? Even counselors exposed to lots of other clients. Do we have the right PPE? Do we have what we need to stay safe? And when we go home, do we feel compelled to isolate from our own families because we don't want to make them sick just in case today was the day we caught something? So that can be a really tough thing for people. Those are hard choices. So I told Christian and Catherine I would talk a little bit about pre-existing risks in mental health, and they'll probably say a little bit more about this in their own presentations. But as I mentioned, pre-existing conditions of mental illness were already an issue in the workplace. We see that we would get calls from supervisors and leaders saying, I don't know what to do with this person. And now there are only increased opportunities for abuse, people struggling with a poor history of coping. Maybe they, as long as things are going well, they're doing pretty well, but you add a few stressors on top of that, including financial insecurity these days. And they really struggle. It's more than some people can handle. So you still need people to come in and do their jobs. You cannot become a place where people just show up for 8 hours a day for therapy, right? They have to come in and do the business of your business. And those protective factors that I hinted at before, those are the things that help us get better and stay better and avoid relapse and avoid crisis. Those protective factors are very simple things like family connections, friends and social connections, support groups. Those things aren't available the way they used to be. And while we're doing a lot of Zoom stuff these days and a lot of virtual counseling and even a lot of virtual social stuff, it's just not quite the same, especially for that generation of us who was raised with a big emphasis on social interaction and relationships, those kind of things. So people may not feel as comfortable over the phone or over the computer to connect with others. They might not have the tech savvy to do it. If you came onto this presentation early, you heard me say the hardest part of any presentation for me is the technology. I'm always worried I'm gonna hit a button and the whole screen's gonna go blank. And then the social isolation is not helpful for people who are already struggling with stress, distress, and mental illness. Isolation exacerbates those problems it can be in a very big way. So since COVID started, or since we started dealing with COVID, I should say, in maybe mid-March, right? We've seen an increase in gun sales, an increase in suicide, mental health crisis calls, domestic abuse has gone way up. I'm on a board of directors of a shelter, and while they're saying that they're struggling with how to help people feel safe inside a shelter when they need shelter, the need for services has increased steadily over time. And of course, substance abuse, when people are spending more time at home and feeling more stressed with less social interaction and less of that positive kind of coping influence, sometimes they resort to things that aren't so very healthy for them. So when an employee is already suffering from mental illness, the social factors related to COVID really can sometimes put them right over the top. So employees maintaining a relatively good mental health in the workplace before might start struggling. So people you thought were doing a good job and they were just fine and there should be no problem, you might see a little bit of stress, a few symptoms of ineffective coping in them now, and that can really surprise leadership in a workplace to think this is one of my best employees, or this person was always so steady. But remember, we've lost so many things in the way of those coping supports, and that can really be a challenge. So our EAP utilization is on the rise. Behavioral health and EAP have had to figure out how to do so much virtually now. And I'm sure that Catherine will talk about that too. The idea of these virtual appointments can be a little bit challenging, but they're not necessarily worse than seeing somebody in person with a mask or a face shield on. So we have to figure out what's best for our employees and kind of meet them there. And then to think about the workplace itself, your plate is already full. You already had a full-time job in a leadership or management position or whatever position you were in. And now you're needing to watch these kind of things, maybe even more so than you did before. And that can cause leadership to start struggling as well. So it's a tough thing. The competing harm, the isolation for physical safety, while we're talking about physical safety, seems like a smart thing, but that isolation is what feeds people's sometimes not so healthy coping mechanisms. So if I'm going to be alone for days and days anyway, who's going to know if I'm drinking, if I can hold it together on a Zoom meeting, right? Or I go home and there's nobody to talk to, or I can't talk to anybody, and I might just smoke a little marijuana to take the edge off. We see a little bit of that increasing these days. So our protective factors actually become risks now. So it's the perfect storm. People are operating in crisis mode. When school started, holy cats, we saw lots of stress from parents, from employees who were afraid that if they asked for accommodation in the workplace, they might put their own job in jeopardy, but afraid that if they didn't, they wouldn't be able to manage their education for their kids. So normal ways that we coped before are kind of taken apart, and the ways that we could soothe ourselves and take care of ourselves just aren't available. Mental health issues have long been a challenge, not only in the workplace, but in the school as well, and socially as well. But now we can't look away from them. We've got to deal with this in the workplace and figure out how we can support those employees in this time until we all figure out what is going to be maybe the new normal. I know that sounds kind of cliche, but how it's going to be going forward, and giving people a chance to get used to the idea that we're going to be dealing with a lot of change every day. So we may make a decision and make a change in the workplace today, but it's going to change again in a week or in 2 weeks. So once we get used to living that way, where that change is happening all the time, we'll develop some skills and we'll manage that pretty well. But right now, we're not so used to that, and it doesn't feel so good. So from a workplace perspective, we have not only the employee, but then we also are aware that their families aren't doing so well. and they're they need a place to talk about that. They need a place to problem solve that. They at least need to figure out how to accommodate what's going on at home while they're trying to come to work and, and do their jobs well. So that's a lot of bad news, right? That's a lot of overwhelming, holy cats, and I didn't sign up for this, and workplaces shouldn't have to be doing all of this. But if your goal is to have your employee come in and do their job well, then we're not going to be able to ignore this anymore. So the good news for employers is that you don't have to save everybody. You've got a team, even on this call, on this Zoom meeting, you've got a team of people who can help you and want to problem solve with you. So this pandemic has uncovered lots of areas of issue and need for all of us. Employees, families, schools, workplaces, we all realize that we didn't have it quite so sewn up perfectly. But we can't just plug holes in the boat. We've got to look at maybe switching boats here, or we got to look at new ways of doing things. So change doesn't happen unless it has to happen, right? People like to do what they've always done. And now only when we're realizing that what we've always done isn't working so well, now we're faced with having to do something different. So that definitely seems to be the case now. So I would encourage you to reimagine your workplace, the ways of doing things. What are changes that you've made in necessity now that might be a blessing later? So I've seen that even in our EAP team, being able to do some virtual work. I think for the team, that's going to be a blessing later. But now if you're in a factory where things need to be made on an assembly line, that's just not going to be an option for you. You're going to need to have your people come in. But really, those are fair questions to ask. Do we all need to come to work every day? Will the change that we're dealing with from COVID change the way we deliver our goods and services? And only you know that based on what your workplace is and what your goals in your workplace are. So your influence in the workplace. In times of change and uncertainty, your team needs leadership. So your leadership is super important right now. Not all the right answers, but genuine, sincere leadership. And I think that relationship with your employees is what they're looking for. The trust that you'll tell them what they need to know. So looking out for them, admitting that everything's not rosy for everybody, but we're making the best decisions we can for the sake of the organization and the employees themselves. You are not a counselor, and you don't have to put yourself in that position of fixing people's problems. I hear lots of managers talk about that. They just want to save their people, but you can notice things. And when you notice things, you may have relationship enough with employees to remind them to go get some support, get some help. If you have relationship with a counseling clinic or an EAP or even the school and the resources at the school, remind them to go and ask for resources and help there. As this pandemic drags on, you'll see additional needs and challenges, and that will be the thing to do. You don't have to find the answer for them. You want to connect them to resources. So try not to do this alone. As a leader, you manage your resources. Now's the time to get your resources in order. So HR, EAP, community resources, the Fox Valley Chamber, all of the resources that you have. Learning from each other is a super important thing right now. You don't have to figure this out all on your own. This is not the best time to insist on doing things the way we've always done them, because people are close to breaking point sometimes, and they may not be able to perform for you if they don't feel like they have a little bit of support behind that. You'll want to advocate for latitude for your employees. You'll want to be creative as time passes. And what works today is not going to work tomorrow. That's just the way it's going to be. So your compassion toward your employees will go a long way. Again, you're not their therapist. You're not their counselor. But your compassion, your willingness to listen to them and say, let's problem solve this together. This is what I need. This is what you need. Let's find some area where this overlaps and it can work together. That's your best opportunity. That's your best strength as a leader. So empathy for your employees' situations. People have complicated lives. We were laughing before webinar started, I have 4 dogs by accident. We always worry that our dogs are going to bark when we're on a Zoom meeting. You know, domestic violence, where that was an iffy thing before, that can become a big, big problem when people are at home all the time and don't really have any space from each other. So our employees' coping and resources are going to be tested a lot these days. Homeschooling, I can't wait to hear what Kristen tells us about homeschooling. Even getting lunch on the table takes a toll for our employees. We have no idea what they're dealing with at home, and what they tell us might be just the tip of the iceberg. But being understanding will go a long way. Now, this does not mean that you lower your expectations and nobody has to get their work done. But the compassion that you can express for them helps them feel stronger so that they can get their work done. And you want to be consistent about what you expect from your employees now. This is not the time to say, yeah, just show up, do what you want. People need to get their jobs done because companies need to survive this. And that's the way you survive it, is to be successful in the workplace. So are your expectations reasonable as they're related to the employee's work performance? That's an important thing to think of. Are you helping them balance needs without, without taking the focus off of work, because that is what they're coming there for, and focus on one, home, or the other, work, without considering the other influences, isn't going to be able to help you create a lot of success. We created an EAP, a program called We Care that talks about look, listen, and link. And that's a great kind of mantra for you to look at when you're interacting with employees. Look for employees that are suffering a little bit, they're acting differently than they used to, maybe they're not doing as well in their work as they used to. Listen to them carefully and compassionately, listen to what they're going through, and then link them to resources. You are not the solver of all their problems, but you may know of resources that can help them, and you yourself, as a compassionate listener, are a resource for them. People say that all the time in counseling. It just felt so good for somebody to just pay attention and listen to me. So action for you. This is probably the slide you'll want to save. Things you can do in the workplace. Be flexible. Consider flexible hours, working on-site, off-site. That might seem like a big perk to work from home, but now that a lot of us have been working from home for a long time, we don't necessarily see it that way. So don't feel like you're giving somebody like the gold prize and the next person doesn't get to work from home. Some of us like to go in for the respite of the chaos at home. Provide support where you can, financial support where you can. There are some government programs, and now there's the tax benefit to helping with additional childcare support. Look for those things, stay up on those. I think the chamber is probably going to be very, very helpful for employers around those kinds of resources. Encourage people to take time off. If they've got vacation time, tell them to use it, encourage it, talk about it, push it, model it. Take vacation yourself, because if you are working and behaving as a martyr, they're going to understand that even though you say it, you really want that martyr behavior for them too. Ask people what they need, not that you can give them everything they want, but ask them what they need. It's a great way to let them know you care. And then make mental health resources available. So the silver lining, much of what we experience in these days feels pretty tough, and we have to be pretty creative about our solutions. But the fact is, we continue to learn and create new solutions, and people may start out carrying a lot of negative feelings, but over time, there's this phenomenon called post-traumatic growth. And you're going to see that in your employees in the workplace. People who maybe were kind of gliding along and just doing what you expected are going to be able to step up and come up with great ideas. So listen to your employees. Not that you have to do everything that they ask, but they'll come up with solutions that you may never have thought of. And that is called the silver lining, right? When people get engaged and work hard to keep the whole organization growing and steady. So look for that silver lining. It helps you feel a little hopeful too. And I think I'm going to stop there. That's a lot of talking. I'll stop sharing my screen, and we'll go on to Catherine, who's going to talk about mental health in the workplace. This is a great segue.
Thank you, Rayanne. A lot of what I think the three of us are going to talk about today is going to overlap, which is, I think, appropriate, as there is really no divide between homework and school anymore. So over these past few months, it's been challenging in a lot of different ways. Information and recommendations have changed rapidly as we've learned more about COVID and how it spreads and how we can help the people who become infected. We've experienced a loss of routine, financial hardship, loss of social interaction, increased isolation, and a lot of uncertainty. Our community has been experiencing collective trauma. A lot of times we think about trauma as being in a car accident or having something very violent happen to us, but trauma is really about how your life is impacted by significant stressors and events. Not everybody is going to react to events in the same way, and some people have trauma responses and other people don't. But knowing that there's a disruption in your level of functioning as a result of the stressor you're experiencing is what is considered a trauma response. So that could be adjustment disorder, or that could grow into PTSD. So being aware that we're all experiencing collective trauma and reacting to it in different ways, and the chronic stress that Rayanne had mentioned, is the result of this pandemic. That is what is going on. That is our situation. The longer that we experience stress, the more likely our mental health is going to suffer. This happens because our coping strategies that we've had previously are less effective. If you think about having a baseline of stress, like your normal day-to-day pre-COVID, you might have been able to cope with that really, really well, but now your baseline of stress is up here. And so the things that you've been doing on a daily basis aren't as effective. It's not because you're failing, it's because the situation has changed and we need to adapt to account for those changes. So you might be experiencing exacerbated symptoms of depression and anxiety, or new symptoms of depression and anxiety that you haven't experienced before. So being aware of changes in yourself and in family and friends is important. So some signs of depression or anxiety can include loss of interest and motivation, increased alcohol or substance use, feeling more on edge or restless, feeling more lethargic, slowed down, seeing that somebody isn't moving as quickly as they have previously, sleep disturbances, appetite disturbances, so getting too much sleep, not enough sleep, eating too much, not eating enough. Anything that is off of your baseline, how you would typically on average respond or act day to day, anything that's a difference can be a sign of depressive symptoms and anxiety symptoms. So first, being aware of that. If it's something you are experiencing, looking for resources like EAP, if you have that through your workplace, calling behavioral health, calling any counseling or resource that you have available so that you can talk to somebody and help develop some of those coping strategies. Reaching out to friends and family that you notice are struggling and just labeling, hey, I'm noticing this is going on. I'm here if you need anything. In what ways can I support you? Don't assume that you can fix it or try and fix it, like Rayanne had mentioned, but you want to give people the space to feel safe to be able to reach out and get those resources as needed. Some of the things that you can do for yourself at home to help bolster your coping and resilience during this time would include making sure that you are taking care of yourself. So engaging in self-care, eating meals regularly, getting regular sleep, even if it's not the same as it has been previously, putting more effort into doing that, making sure that you're taking time to engage in interests or hobbies and connecting with people, even if it's over video or socially distant outside, even if you have to wear a mask, even if you can't do some of those things that you had enjoyed doing. I always enjoyed going to the farmer's market personally. I have not felt that that was something I could do this year, but I have engaged in gardening at my home. I have made meals. I have looked at buying local produce to support in other ways, even if I don't get to walk downtown like I would normally like to. So finding creative ways to do things differently, but still get those emotional needs met and still doing those things that you enjoy. So changing your mindset from I'm losing something to what am I doing different and what am I gaining? What can I do to engage in these things that I enjoy doing versus I can't do anything anymore. I can't do all the things I want to do, and so there's nothing for me. Rayanne had mentioned telehealth as something that has been new for all of us who are mental health providers and some of us who are medical providers as well. So telehealth can be kind of scary. Technology can be a little intimidating. I have been doing telehealth appointments since mid-March, and it has been fantastic. It's been great to be able to reach out to clients that are going away to school, that are more confined to their homes, that have difficult schedules that make it hard for them to attend appointments. Sometimes we have technological difficulties and we work through them and we figure it out. But that is a great resource if you are concerned about not being able to get services because you're not comfortable seeing somebody in person, or the mask really bothers you when you're wearing that. Telehealth is an option and it can work really, really well. At this time, most insurance companies are still covering that. And it looks like for at least the foreseeable future, that will continue to happen. So check with your insurance company and don't be afraid to give it a try. And if you really don't like it, I'm sure any counselor would be happy to problem solve with you and help you find out how you can get the resources that you need. So I think that's all I have to say right now, and I will pass it off to Kristen.
Hey everybody, I'm glad to be here. A lot of the stuff that I will share will overlap as well, because there was a lot of great information that you guys both shared. So I want to start by saying this is difficult. I mean, this is something we have not faced before, and so we need to keep reminding ourselves of that. And with children, we need to remind ourselves of that this is new for them. So, I mean, it's all unknown, it's all uncertain. And so I think that one of the things I want to stress is that patience. We need to be patient with ourselves. We need to be patient with our kids, even employees. You know, we just need to be patient, because this is all different, and there's a lot of different responses that each person will have. Nothing is, you know, cookie cutter, so to speak. So it's okay to fall apart. It's okay to have all of these different feelings. I think Rayanne mentioned grief is a huge one that a lot of people are experiencing, because it's change. It's we don't get to do the things that we used to do. And so it's okay to not know, you know, what you're doing from day to day, and take one day at a time. So just remember to be patient, and that you're not alone, that there is resources out there. There are places to get that help. So when I work with kids, primarily I see kids, I see teenagers. I work in our IOP, intensive outpatient program at Catalpa Health. And so with that, we are seeing a lot of kids with increased depression, increased anxiety. There's that increase in stress, the loneliness, even, you know, confusion on, you know, day to day and what they're supposed to do with school or be home or be with friends. There's no right or wrong. So that really presents them with an added stress. So one thing with kids, they are resilient. You know, they will get through this with our help. So a huge protective factor for kids is having that supportive adult, having someone to listen. That will help with that isolation, that loneliness. And I know that as parents, we're all working, so sometimes it's really hard to be present, but to take that moment and really be present with your kids, talk to them, sit with them, validate their feelings. We can't fix the pandemic. We can't fix that they might not be able to go to school or they might not be able to hang out with their friends. And so we need to validate that this is really hard for them. Validate that it's okay for them to have anger or to be frustrated or to be sad, and allow them to have those feelings, because that's really important, that they need to express them. So during this time for kids, help them find a normal, help your family find a normal. That's hard. I think my 4-year-old going into this, he asked for a Hershey bar every morning. I gave him a Hershey bar every morning. The dentist is going to love us, but that's what we had to do in that moment when we were just learning Zoom and we were technology and he was home and we were home. And so he had a Hershey bar. He's not having a Hershey bar anymore. But, you adjust, you adapt, he'll be fine. And so, but, it's change. And so we have to really be gentle with ourselves and change some of those expectations and change the expectations that we have for our kids. So be creative, get creative, go have a picnic outside, do something that maybe you haven't done before outdoors that you feel safe doing. New family routines, enjoy, maybe the slower pace. Find laughter in your home, with stress and with the grief and the change. It's really important to find something to laugh at. And so, laugh at something, be creative, those are big things. So when it comes to getting help for your kids, you first need to look at, do I need help? Do I need to talk to somebody? There's no shame in going to see a therapist and just venting or getting that support. That's a big one, because kids are going to look at you for modeling. They're going to look at you for that support and for you to set that example. You can also acknowledge to your kids, like, I'm having a hard time too. This is all new. This is all scary. So again, they know that they're not alone. Get support within your family who can help you at home with the kids, who can help you with virtual learning, who is your support system, either via technology that you can reach out to, texting or calling, who's kind of in your, place that you can call on so you don't feel isolation and your kids feel less isolation. Minimize exposures. So, be careful what you're watching on TV that your kids are seeing. Be careful, how often you have the radio on. Sometimes we don't realize that we're having these big conversations in front of our kids, and then they pick up on that. And because we're talking to adult, they can twist it in their mind to make it really big and really scary. So we want to talk to our kids, our teenagers, at their level and make it simple for them that, yeah, there are germs when you're dealing with little ones. There are germs out there. But this is what we can do to stay safe. So really work with spending time with that and talking about it. Give your child a chance to talk about the big feelings. Exercise with your child, exercise yourself. Healthy meals is going to be important. Getting that balanced sleep and creating some sense of routine, which again is really hard when we're home and your kids are engaging in school and you're working. But try to create, it might be a new and different routine, but find something that might work for you. If your employer is, flexible, can you be home with the kids a little in the morning and then go into work, or vice versa? So really work with your employer, with your family, and, with your partner in all of this and how to make it work for you. And that's different for everybody. And there is absolutely no right or wrong routine or how we are doing this. It's just, we need, like Rayanne said, we need to adjust. What works today might not work tomorrow. I think I touched on validation and how important that is for kids to validate that this is scary. It is unknown for them. So as a parent, you know your child the best. So anything, when this first started, of course, there's an adjustment period, there's big feelings, there's frustration, there's anger. If those continue to happen and you're continuing to see them act out, or emotional behaviors, excessive worries, obsession with even dying or grandma or grandpa dying, and that constant worry about that, withdrawing, lack of motivation, for kids, maybe they're sleeping more. Teenagers, initially I know a lot of teenagers were sleeping a lot during the day and up at night. Again, an adjustment. But if that continues, that they're sleeping all day, up all night, that's something to kind of pay attention for. Self-harming is another one that could increase with teenagers during the pandemic. The more isolated they feel, the withdrawing, that could increase. And same with suicide ideation. They're not seeing their friends. They aren't going out of the house. And so those are big pieces that we have to be aware of. Sometimes it's the kids that we least expect that are affected more so. We have to know our children. Are they really big extroverts? And what are they missing? And how can we get creative at finding something to fill that? And some kids adjust really well, and it didn't phase them. It's like, okay, they go with their flow. There's different personalities, and we have to be aware of who my child is, and is their behavior different right now. And so there's lots of places offering telehealth in person, even if your child would do better in person and you feel comfortable with that. The resources are out there. Sometimes kids and teenagers may present differently. So that's something, little kids might be more clingy, some separation anxiety, more crying, a lot more sensitive. Teenagers, well, they're not that different because they could also have some tantrums themselves. But they're going to be withdrawing. You might see some anger, irritability. So remember to be patient with them. We have to change our expectations. We still want to get the job done and complete it, but we have to somewhat change our expectations because we are working at home. We are having, kids at home all day. And so, sometimes maybe your house is a mess, and that's okay. It's okay because we're going to pay attention to our kids and help them get their homework done and play with them and spend time with them in the house. That's thing that's going to fall apart. And that is okay. Sometimes we have to sacrifice something, and right now we have to choose what we're going to sacrifice to pay attention to kind of their mental health and their needs. So again, there is help with that. The other big piece that we are dealing with is this virtual learning. It creates a really big stress for kids. They don't know what to expect going into it. Some ninth graders are going into high school and never been into high school, and now they have to start virtual learning. Kindergarteners who don't know what a classroom is or kindergarten is are now on this virtual setting. Again, kids are resilient, but they are going to look to you and for their teachers for support. Create a space within your home if you're able to have a place designated for their workspace so they can sit at the table and then they can get away from it. They can put that on pause. Here's your classroom at home, and now let's go do something fun. If you can, try to sit with them for a little bit and try to help them through some of that homework. So again, they're not alone. Some kids, I would imagine, they are going to be home. Teenagers may be home all day by themselves because both parents are working. And so we want to acknowledge that. And when we come home from work, it's going to be really hard, but we want to go to the kids. We want to talk to them about their day, try to pull them out of their room or away from their homework. In virtual learning, it's going to be changing. Teachers are not used to this, and so they are doing the best they can. Our kids are doing the best they can, and we are. So I'm sure that virtual learning will continue to change and evolve. So we, again, have to be patient with our schools and what they are trying to accomplish and trying to keep our kids safe. If you're sending your kids in person, that's okay too. There's no right or wrong here. It's what you feel safe with. It's what also you feel the need to do for your family and what's right for your family and if you're able. So some kids may experience more anxiety because they are in person. Then you want to talk to them about that and how they can keep themselves safe and what's right for your family. With virtual learning, again, get help from your family if you can, from older siblings if you can, but one day at a time with all of this, one assignment at a time, and try to set that good example for your kids by you getting help or you talking about the things that you need to talk about and that self-care. So there's so much more I'm sure that I could go on about when it comes to kids and mental health, but really look for changes that you may see that are not normal for your child and talk to them, get them help, and then be patient. So I just want to thank everybody for your time. So I don't know if we have any questions.
Kristen, this is Rayanne. I just want to say, do you hear much or deal much with, I'm seeing universities open and close, and I know those aren't little kids, but those are still parents who are very worried about their children. Can you say much about that?
Sure. At Catalpa, we see all the way to 18. So we don't see the college students at this time. However, I would imagine that some of it is the same as the teenagers that they're experiencing. They're going away from home. So you have that stress that they're not used to. And then if they have to quarantine within the college, that can really be increased loneliness, increased depression. So if you have a child on campus, call them daily, text them, check on them. They'll get annoyed, I'm sure, but it's worth, really looking for those signs of depression because you're not in person with them. So I would encourage that. And the fact of the matter is, this is a new pandemic. We're not used to this. We don't fully know the results of what virtual learning will be like for our kids and how that will fully affect them. And so I keep reminding myself that kids are resilient, and this is the way it is right now, and there is hope that it won't always be like this, and maybe it will be something different. And what are the silver linings? Where is the hope? What with kids, what are we grateful for right now? Sometimes in the news it's so much negative and it's just scary stuff, but we can still concentrate on every day, what are you grateful for? What are our blessings in our life? And that will also help combat some of the depression, is that hope and that, gratefulness.
That's cool. Thanks, Kristen. Catherine, I bet that a big share of the work that you're doing now is helping people remember how they coped and their resilience, right? I mean, even grown-ups are resilient.
Yeah, human beings are resilient. It's easy for us to adapt when you look at the complexity of our lives, but figuring out how you're going to adapt is probably the more challenging part. So we are all resilient. We all have the ability to be resilient and to change. And so being able to do that and have that self-compassion and self-forgiveness and remind yourself that you're doing your best at this time. And even though it doesn't feel like it right now, this is temporary. Things are not going to be this way forever. We just don't know when they're going to be back to normal and what that normal is going to look like. I think Tanya had some Q&A, maybe?
Yes, I do actually. We had two questions that came in, so I'm going to go ahead and I'll position them to all three of you, and whoever thinks they want to pick it up or it might fit best in your niche, you go ahead and just answer. If all three of you want to chime in, that's great too. The first attendee had noted that Imagine Fox Cities has an initiative to help those who feel socially isolated, and the pandemic obviously hasn't helped that situation any. So how do we as a community help those who are struggling with isolation during this time?
So one of the things that we can do as a community is look at creative opportunities to reduce isolation. It's not necessarily going to be safe to do that all in person, and we need to be cognizant of the risks, but doing things differently. I'm not familiar with what Imagine Fox Cities had planned, but if there's a way to adapt those original plans to reach out to those people that were going to be involved or who were interested, whether that is through telephone or virtually, providing socially distant activities like out at a park or somewhere that would be public but outside. The weather is changing a little bit now, but it's not winter yet, so we should have some cool, dry weather. So taking advantage of that, I think can be really helpful. And I don't know if Kristen or Rayanne have anything to add to that.
You know, I don't, except that I just want to give you a little anecdote from my personal life. I had to run to the post office. Now I don't get to see anybody anymore, and we have immune compromised family members, so I really do have to isolate so that I don't bring something home to them. But I had to go to the post office a couple of weeks ago, and as I was coming out of the post office, I saw one of those rocks that was painted, had a sunshine on it. And I don't know who painted that rock. I don't know who put that there, but I picked it up and I instantly felt closer to like everybody. And I think that we have to kind of expand our definition of what social is going to be. And so now I have some rocks and some gel pens, and I'm making some rocks, and I'm going to leave them when I go to the grocery store or out, because I think we're going to need to look at the way we can connect with people differently, because everybody doesn't do well on this Zoom stuff. I think, Catherine, to your point, you know, most of the time people really end up liking virtual counseling, but from a social perspective, I don't know, you know, I talk too much and I interrupt everybody. So that might not be the best thing for me, but be creative, be very open-minded about the little spots in your day that give you the lift, and just do more of that. So I just want to say that, you know, as I was listening to Kristen and Catherine, I was thinking about, you know, be a role model for other people around healthy coping, not perfection. You don't have to be perfect, but just one little thing here and there to take good care of yourself reminds those people around you and your kids to do the same for themselves, that's a good thing to do. And I think my new mantra is have a plan and then have a plan B, because we're always going to need to look at it another way.
Very good. Thank you so much for that insight. We do have one more question that I would like to share. As more people are beginning to work remotely, it is more difficult to see how mental health is being affected, given the distance, obviously, from them. How do we as employers identify the struggles when we're not physically seeing our employees every day?
Well, I think Catherine probably gave you probably the best answer to this, is when people don't look like they did at their baseline. Now, I know you're not in person with them, but the interaction you have with them over time, you may see kind of an evolution in their ability to cope. So early on in COVID, in March, how did I work and how did I interact with you over the computer and Zoom meetings, and even getting my work product done, and was the quality of my work still good? And over time now, I'm getting tired of this Zoom stuff, right? I bet you all are. We're calling it Zoom fatigue now. And I think we can watch that. So watch work product, watch attentiveness to work. And I think that there's a middle ground there too. I mean, we were all in 100% of the time working 24/7 in March. And now people are trying to find a little bit of balance, trying to play board games with their kids in the evening so they're not on their computer all the time, which is a good thing. That's a very good thing. We need some moderation in this. But I think that just watching those kind of things, if you have an instinct that somebody is struggling, you're probably right. Because it's not necessarily what they've said to you, it's those little hints that you pick up. So trust your gut about that with people that you work with. And one of the things I've done, I manage a team of 15 counselors, and boy, counselors are the hardest people to get to attend to their own mental health. Catherine, can you agree? And what I do is I do some purposeful outreach to them. So it's nice to get an email, but I handwrite some notes to them and send them in the mail. Or I sent M&M's had this thing where their packages said like, go ahead, keep pretending you're working, or gold star for all the work you've done. I sent everyone M&M's. I mean, it was just a little something for that connection. Early on, I sent them all homemade masks from somebody that was making homemade masks. So I think that connection, because if you maintain that connection with them, when they truly start to struggle, they'll confide to you. I'm having a hard time. I don't think I can do this. And that's when you say, I want to support you. Let me help you find resources. Catherine's out there. Kristen's out there. Your EAP, you may have EAP. That's when you say, let me help you get connected. So keeping that relationship, Tanya, is a big thing for leaders in workplaces, because the employees will tell you what they need if they trust that you'll listen to them.
Exactly. Very good point. I know we have heard from employees in the area who've made comments about their particular employer, like you mentioned, sending little gift packages in the mail or doing something just a little extra special. I know when you're all in the office together, it's easy to pop in and thank somebody in person, or to, pick up little gifts for them or do that kind of thing. But when you're separated, sometimes it can feel like, are they remembering me? Are they thinking about me? So just that little bit of, just that little extra step is sometimes all it takes to keep your employees engaged and feel appreciated. So good insight. I do have one more question, if you don't mind. We've got just a couple of minutes. This question is pertaining to work-life balance. So we all know that work-life balance can be a struggle. I see Kristen smiling over there already when I mentioned it. I think a lot of us struggle with that in general, but now as people are working from home, really that line is non-existent, right? Your work and your personal life are all happening in the same space. So any tips or pointers that you can share on how people can continue to manage work-life balance when everything is kind of melded into one space?
I think one, creating that space. I know it's been 5 months and I haven't created my space, and a little bit of denial, like, I'm going back, we're going back. And so at first, in the beginning, I worked all day just because I worked in the morning, then I had kids, and then I worked, and then I had kids, and then they went to sleep, and then I worked. That is not probably a good plan to do. But that's our reality, and for a while we had to do it. But really creating those boundaries on your work, if you are able. So, okay, I am going to work in the morning this chunk, but then I'm going to be very mindful and I'm going to take this chunk off. And then, okay, I'll come back to it, but maybe not do that every day. Maybe there's a day where you can, nope, it's 8 to 4 and then I'm good. Really trying to set those limits. And then on the weekend, if you are able, shut that computer, close it off, walk away from it, walk away from your space where your work is. So then you feel like you're not always working all the time. That's one tip. I don't know if Rayanne and Catherine have any more.
I would just add having physical space, mental and emotional space, time limits. Like, boundaries are very, very different. And there's many categories of boundaries. So it's going to be the time that you spend on work and home. It's going to be physically where you do that. Even if, I'm in a basement bedroom right now, not everybody has that ability. So even if it's setting off one part of the table in the dining room or where you eat, as from this time to this time, I'm doing work here, and then I'm going to close it all up and pack it up and put it away, and now I'm home. So just having those boundaries and those limits.
Yeah, I would second that. You guys, I mean, that's exactly what I would have suggested. And the only other thing I would say is, perfection is the enemy, right, of progress. So balance is not a 50-50 thing. And this week, work might eat me alive, but next week I'm coasting. So balance is not just like, I'm always going to be able to turn off the computer at the right time at the end of the day, 8 hours a day, that kind of thing. And I think if we set those standards for ourselves, we start to disappoint ourselves and get frustrated. So be gentle with yourself. You know what? This is the perfect time to treat yourself the way you would treat your best friend. You know, be gentle, be supportive, be encouraging. Let yourself off the hook once in a while. Don't make those standards so impossibly high that you can't meet them. And it will work out. You'll have a project one week that will be just too much work, and the next week the project will be done, and you will be able to read your emails slowly and sort some stuff out, right? Like we all do.
Excellent. Great insight. I think much like I know a couple of you touched on today, holding your kids accountable as they're being students at home, sometimes keeping them focused and making sure they're following a schedule. We need to sometimes as adults do that same thing, right? So we holding ourselves accountable to having a schedule and following through on both our personal and our work lives and the obligations that we have in both. So really good insight. Thank you so much, ladies. I apologize. We did go over just a tiny bit today, but all really important information. And I think those extra couple of minutes were well worth it. So Kristen, Rayanne, Catherine, I know you are all extremely busy, and we are so thankful for the time that you took today. And for everybody who attended, thank you so much. We will continue to share great content. If you'd like to see what we've got going on at the Chamber, watch our events page, our Chamber calendar at foxcitieschamber.com for future future events, both virtual. That's pretty much all, right? Zoom fatigue. They'll be mostly virtual, but we'll continue to share great content there and through our social media channels. This webinar will be recorded and posted in a couple of days. If you feel like there are people who could benefit from this, please, please, please share that. Again, this mental health is a very important topic at this time, and we hope that this webinar will be a resource to both those in attendance and anybody that you feel may benefit. So thanks again, Kristen, Rayanne, and Catherine. We appreciate your time and your insight, and I hope everybody has a great day and a great rest of their week.